could these metabolites that have now shown these emergent metabolic and signaling properties that may be beneficial, can they apply to have health implications or performance implications in these extremely high level operational individuals? And so what we did is we were testing it in one of the challenging environments that military personnel may engage in, and that's hypoxia. A lot of people, when they think performance, they're thinking, okay, well, I'm going to run on a track for 100 meters. But what if you need to go into an austere environment, such as a mountain range? You need to not only engage in chronic or elevated levels of physical activity, but now you need to cognitively perform at a level that it could mean life or death. And so that's the composite nature. You could be sleep deprived. You could have lower caloric intake. You could have all these different interactions that go into it. And so one of those stressors is something is like hypoxia. And that doesn't just apply to military. That could also apply to someone who's going to race in a mountain range, or like Tour de France, where they're climbing mountain ranges oftentimes within a day that can lead to meaningful changes in elevation that change physiology. And so one of the challenges with hypoxia or high altitude environments is low oxygen availability, which can cause declines in cognitive performance. They absolutely can lead to declines in physical performance. And so what we did and what we were interested in is we were interested in the potential cognitive enhancing effects of ketone bodies, because there was literature going back a half a century showing that ketone bodies could replace glucose as a energy metabolite in the brain. And so we also knew that there was evidence on ketogenic diets and seizures, and a whole bunch of other evidence that led to this idea that this could be a powerful augmentic tool or ergogenic tool in these environments. And so we took individuals and put them at 20,000 foot altitude, and had them engaging in very demanding cognitive tasks. So we would put them in this controlled setting and a controlled environment and try to just truly isolate out the question. If you add these molecules into this controlled environment, military personnel, do they improve performance? And despite putting people at 20,000 foot altitude, so equivalent to Mount Kilimanjaro, the tip of that, not quite Everest, which most people, frankly, you don't survive at Everest. If you put it at Everest immediately, it would be life-threatening within minutes. But Mount Kilimanjaro is one of the highest mountains in the world. So suffice to say, it's very, very high. And your ability to sustain cognitive function is actually minutes at that level. And what we found is that when we administered ketone bodies, number one, it did improve cognitive performance. What it was doing was it was blunting the decline in performance from normal oxygen levels to lower oxygen levels. So it was providing resilience against the lower oxygen availability on cognitive performance. But what was even more fascinating to us was that it appeared that the administration of ketone bodies was actually elevating the level of oxygen that was saturated in the blood. Now, how is that possible? How was ketone bodies increasing oxygen levels in the body? Well, we had no idea. I mean, we were seeing meaningful elevations of ketone bodies in the blood, and enough to where we thought, oh, wow, there's a significant effect in physiology from these molecules that we would have never expected, that ultimately was associated with this enhancement in cognitive performance. So we then took the next step, because it's important. I'll highlight here in a minute how we think this is happening. But we also want to do this in the context of exercise, because if you put someone at 20,000 foot and they do cognitive demanding tasks, what happens when you also incorporate exercise in the mix? And so we had this massive chamber that individuals in this inclined ruck. So a ruck is a weighted backpack that's could be anywhere from 50 to 100 plus pounds that someone puts on their back, and they're often climbing up mountainous terrain. And this is a very demanding task, much more demanding in low oxygen availability. So heart rate's exceptionally high, very demanding physical activity task. And we asked the question, if you're doing this military relevant physical activity, what happens in hypoxia now? Because we also know in the context of exercise that exercise has its own independent cognitive enhancing effects. So if you were to go for a run, or go engage in some extremely difficult exercise that really elevates your heart rate for a long period of time, this often leads to improvements in cognitive performance in individuals for a number of mechanisms. And what we found in this setting is that it appeared to again improve the oxygen saturation level. And what we also found is that it appeared that the means by which ketones were potentially improving cognitive performance might be overlapping with exercise. Because when we looked at historical studies and our findings, it appeared that when a lot of the mechanisms of physical activity performance seem to overlap with ketone based performance. And we're still baffled by this idea that oxygen levels were higher. And what it's interesting is if you look at the standard of care for someone who goes to altitude, let's say you go from sea level up to a mountain range and you get sick. So something called acute mountain sickness, where you can get you get insomnia, you have headaches, reduced performance, you can feel sick to the stomach. This is a symptom of low oxygen availability. One of the medications that are provided, in fact, medications provided almost ubiquitously around the world and in various settings, including in military settings, is Diamox or acetazolamide, which what it does is it increases oxygen availability in the blood. How it mechanistically works is it actually causes a mild acidosis in the body. Not a dangerous level, but a mild acidosis. And when you drink these ketone bodies, it also induces a mild elevation in acid load, not one that would be damaging or counterproductive, because obviously we saw an enhancement in cognitive performance, but this mild acidosis appeared to model the same physiology that these drugs do. The problem with the standard of care drugs is that all the literature right now suggests that these drugs reduce physical performance and cognitive performance, which particularly in a military setting could be extremely, extremely life-threatening, right? If you're taking a drug to relieve your symptoms of altitude, but at the same time, it reduces your cognitive physical capabilities, that's problematic. And so it's exciting about the possibility that even in the context of this work, that we're seeing these abilities to reduce the impact of hypoxia and improve cognitive performance. And it seems to model some of the physiology of what people have done for years, which is use drugs to reduce mountain sickness. But this may be an alternative path that doesn't have the negative cognitive physical performance. In fact, appears to improve cognitive performance in these settings. And so there's a lot more work on this front, a lot of work in the military, Department of Defense range and beyond, because there's a lot of interest in finding ways to improve optimal and elite level performance, not just in athletes, but in operational environments and other highly demanding environments as well. And so the research is continuing this front, but that was our most emergent work. We've done a lot of work in physical performance and other settings with ketones as well.